All right, G2 Hanwha. This is one of my favorite drafting teams in the case of G2 here because of the environment they've produced, right? They are just so darn creative and they love to just really test the limits, try new shit at the wall, just really give it a whirl, you know what I'm saying? Like they are down to clown essentially, and a lot of teams they have to prepare for that or they're not going to keep up, right? While this draft is not, let's say, the craziest I've ever seen G2 ever go for, the way they approach it and the way they apply pressure is very unique. They're like, hey, man, you going to react to this or what? Or are we just going to get what we want here? You know, like, we're going to give this for you to chew on. So, for example, look, pay attention to the Narban, right? This sets up for a lot of pressure on top side. If they, depending on Doran, whether he wants to go for the Jax opener, and also the Akali ban, which threatens Yone B1, right? Because the most traditional forward counter to the Yone would be the Akali in this sort of meta at the moment. Also note the full clear jungler bans that Hanwha have opted for. This tells me that G2 know a little bit about how Hanwha like to play, and then they are most likely this Sejuani pick was most likely fairly premeditated, and G2 have identified that the best way they can circumvent this is to basically draft in a way that puts pressure on them to really get ahead early game, or else it's cooked, right? So they go Sejuani Jax. Not bad. It's a decent strong side combo, and gives them a good opener to start with, let's say, in terms of like what Korean teams are looking for, generally speaking. Then G2 still tap into the full clear anyway, and they go for Lilia Poppy. Well, stylistically, I actually do really like this. And the Poppy, although it like semi doesn't make as much sense because you have the Yone who likes to go in a little bit, but then the Poppy peels back along with the Lilia, etc., etc. G2 have probably identified there's just an insane amount of value here. And because the first two champs that Hanwha pick, boom, you get 2 counters already, right? You can stop 2 dashes. In response, Hanwha actually go for the Smolder pick on 3 because basically it shifts our identity to threaten a little bit more and match that front to back or match that scaling that G2 tried to bring to the table. And while it's been good so far and the logic is there, this brings up a little bit of like strain on the G2 draft, let's put it that way. And it happens in a lot of these AD carry drafts where specifically it ends up going phase 2 a lot, not because people don't want to blind AD carry. It's more so like all the other things are like deemed more important for most teams, so AD carry often drops to phase 2. And we're also in a meta where there's not that many good AD carries. So what happens is that like 6 or 7 ADs are banned or something like that. And then, usually it only takes like 2 or 3 of them to be banned to force the pool down a little bit, right? So when Hanwha go for this Ashe on 4 here, there's actually not many options left for G2. And the problem is, and G2 kind of recognized this because they actually go for the Varus response, right? Normally, in terms of flavor, Varus is not very strong. It hasn't been very successful in the Worlds event so far, and with good reason, right? He's not what he used to be. He's a lot weaker. It's just like, so why would G2 go for it, right? Well, they need the pressure, right? Like they've basically picked in lane, Yone's like not going to be the strongest. Poppy is basically a weak side pick into the Jax, so they need a lane to play through based off this game plan, right? And that's where you can kind of see like, oh, that could have been an issue then if G2 wanted to play like this in the first place. So it brings up the question of whether they should have picked the Ashe on 2-3, right? They could have pushed Lilia back, and then if they really want to go Poppy anyway, they could have, or they could hold it back for later. I personally think pulling the Poppy Flex is probably one of the strongest things you could do, but then you can take the Ashe Prio, and then you either force Hanwha to respond AD carry on 3, in which case they would probably have to go Jhin or something, or they give up AD carry and then you can choke into your mid pool a bit like that. So it would have made them more flexible, let's say in that way, by picking the Ashe themselves, and then they have, let's say you could arguably say they have fewer options for the full clear jungler option that they would have later because they banned Zyra Brand. Or you could be like Levi, just pull out the Shyvana. You can go Ivern. There's a lot of other things you can go for as well. So if there was something that would help this G2 draft be a little bit less reactive on the 4 or 5, it would be that. otherwise, you can kind of see why this team is so cool to watch draft, right? It's even though they lost this game, I think they're very strong in terms of the way they draft, and their fundamentals are very sound, right? It's very exciting. You never really know if a G2 draft is won or not, and you kind of have to like be on your toes for that. And that's why, even though they lost this game, I would say it's a good draft to kind of take note of, right? I think also it seems that the Smolder stonks are going up and up in this case, so we have to keep this is a good indicator of how the meta will kind of shape out with like now the let's call the main stage players now in the field, right? Like teams like G2, T1, it's before in the play-in stage, there's so much emphasis on things like the Skarner and like other things like that. Like things like the J4 have completely fallen off as well. Like there's not much presence at all. So we'll have to see. By the time we get into a couple more matches, I'm sure the meta will stabilize, and we'll get a pretty strong grasp as to what teams are prioritizing. In a team like G2 can cook up in the lab and basically come up with the right things to address the situation. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. And yeah, let's catch you in the next one.